Welcome, everyone. We are here with our friend and co-crusader for mental health and brain health, Dr. Carolyn Leaf, who's a communication pathologist, a cognitive neuroscientist with a master's and PhD in communication pathology. She's from South Africa. She's a best-selling author. She is, like me, and a huge believer in neuroplasticity. And she has a brand new book called Cleaning Up Your Mental Mess.
Great book.
5 simple, scientifically proven steps to reduce anxiety, stress, and toxic thinking. So, my goodness, we are living in a society of toxic thinking.
Boy, are we ever.
Emotion.
So, welcome, my friend.
Yeah, welcome.
Thank you so much. So lovely seeing you both again.
Absolutely.
So why this book at this point in time? It seems like it's coming out at a perfect time.
Right.
When the incidence of mental health problems is skyrocketing.
And I asked her this because I know how long it takes to write a book. I asked her this on my Instagram interview. She did not plan this she did not know, just like we didn't know, that there was going to be a quarantine. So if you believe in coincidence, but I would love to hear why you chose to write it when you did.
Well, it was a long time coming, but as you say, I didn't know about the pandemic. And that was when I had actually allocated a batch of time just before the pandemic started, was when I was going to finish writing this, because I just finished the clinical trials and I just finished sort of doing the analysis and thought, well, now I'll sit down to write the book, and thinking, how am I going to do this? Because I travel 70% of the month. And then the pandemic hit. So I actually had time to sit and write the book. And it was just incredible because I really had the results and that kind of thing from the trials. And I've been doing this for so long. And I wanted to bring in this whole, as we say, the narrative that all three of us share against what currently is happening in mental health. And it's made it such a negative thing. And it's made it so out of people's, people are so frightened of their minds and not understanding it. And I really wanted to bring to everyone into their hands what it means to have a mind and what it means to be human again. And as a human, we're in life experimenting and we don't always make the right decisions and we make a mess, and that's okay. And if you feel depression and anxiety, it's part of being human. And so I wanted to get away from the narrative of constantly the scary brain disease story and that you don't have control, back to, hey, listen, we are humans. We can train our mind. Our mind is this trainable thing, and it's not your brain, and it can work through the brain, and the brain responds. And it was just so appropriate that it came out at this time. But I think it's both are. In fact, all of our work it's always timely, because mental health has always been an issue. And that's something I've been saying in all my interviews, is that from the beginning of time till now, we've all been battling with our mind. Just each generation, there's just something else that we're dealing with. And we happen to be dealing with technology and pandemic and that kind of thing. But so mental health is not something new. And I just wanted to make people feel less frightened and have more accessible understanding of mind and brain and their autonomy. And that's why I put the clinical trials in and did it the way that I wrote the book.
And you talk about 5 steps. So let's talk about step number 1 in this podcast. What is the first step to reducing anxiety, stress, and toxic thinking?
So the first step, well, if I can just quickly backtrack a few seconds, the 5-step system is what I developed over 38 years ago, initially in a very therapeutic sense for people with traumatic brain injuries and severe trauma, war trauma, Alzheimer's, autism, that kind of learning disabilities. Then I adapted it into the education system and corporate and government. And then eventually I started saying to myself, but this is something all of us need to understand and know how to do. And what is that? It's our mind. We need to understand mind. And there just was not enough research around mind. And there was so much research, as we know, the neuroscientific explosion has been amazing, but it's made us very focused on the biological that we've forgotten about the interaction with mind. So I really wanted to hone in on mind and understand mind, what it is, what are thoughts, what are emotions, what is mind, what is the brain, and how can we use our mind to change our mind, to clean up the mental mess, to direct the neuroplasticity in our brain. And I started that back in the 80s when they still told us, remember, Daniel, they were telling us the brain couldn't change. change in the 80s. And I remember one of my professors saying this to me, like my neuroscience professors, and I said, I don't see this, because we're always changing as humans. We're always experiencing different things. So they said, well, that's a ridiculous question if you think the mind can change the brain. I said, okay, well, give me the worst population and I'll do research. And they said, okay, work with traumatic brain injury. And I started, and I did some of the first work in my field showing that if you deliberately and intentionally manage your mind, you can change your brain. And out of that was birthed the 5 steps, because I was trying to take complex neuroscientific principles and therapeutic principles and all this stuff, and trying to make it into an accessible way of how can I help someone deliberately and intentionally change their mind. So the very first phase of it was working with people with learning disabilities, traumatic brain injuries, and so on. And it was very much helping them to restore function and to go back to, like, if they were at school and they'd lost that ability, to get back to school, get back to work. And the 5 steps then just grew. And it's a systematic way of deliberately and intentionally driving your mind to be able to then improve how you're functioning in your mind, which then obviously then changes brain and body. So in this particular, over the ensuing years, I developed a theory, did clinical trials, and I still do research. And then as you saw in the book, I've put a summary of the recent research showing the importance of the mind-brain interaction, even down to the level of telomeres. So that's kind of the background. So the 5 steps has got a nice long history, and it's been simplified and over the years. And it's basically, our mind has got 2 zones, for want of a better word. And I always explain it in a very simple very simple analogy would be, if you imagine yourself in a helicopter, but it's a time machine, and you are the pilot and you're the co-pilot. And the pilot's the messy one, like all over experimenting, flying, learning to fly kind of thing. And the co-pilot's the wise mind. And we see neurobiologically that we are wired for love, and we know that there's an optimism bias in us. So our whole being is drawn towards a balancing imbalance. That's why we have the immune system. It's getting rid of the virus. Same thing with toxic thoughts. It creates an imbalance. So our wise minds, this deep inner wisdom that we have, and that's the co-pilot. And what we don't listen to in our busy world is we don't really listen to our co-pilot. We don't tune in sufficiently to that. So the first step, the gather awareness, is for us to train our messy mind, which is actually not a bad thing. Our messy mind, the pilot, is what's very active when we're conscious, when we're awake. And we don't know what's coming up. Life happens and we're responding from the time we wake up till the time we go to bed. This happens, the emails happen, the conversations, the work, and we're constantly responding. And if we don't self-regulate that and manage that, the mind's working anyway. The mind never stops. And it's the mind that's processing that into the brain. And the mind is how we think, feel, and choose. And if we don't manage that, it's very messy. And that's okay to be messy, but we're supposed to manage messy. So we do experiment. I always say that our conscious mind, the pilot in the helicopter, is a very messy kind of experiment of, okay, I got irritated there, now I'm fine here. It's regulating yourself. It's experimenting. But we've got to train ourselves to listen more to the co-pilot. So gather awareness is the whole 5-step process of the neurocycle is all about self-regulation. It's all about mind management, managing our mind, which is 99% of who we are. And it's always working, regardless of, you wake up with your mind, you eat with your mind, you drink with your mind, you talk with your mind, you go to sleep with your mind. It never stops for 3 seconds. So therefore we need to manage it. And the 5 steps is how we manage our mind for the big stuff, like the traumas, like you talk about in your book. And then for the day-to-day stuff that you're dealing with in terms of the just basic dealing with imposter syndrome. If you're looking at something, watching social media, which is such a huge thing with imposter syndrome, especially with our Gen Z, and just whatever the little things that can happen on a day-to-day basis. So what I bring to the table with the 5 steps is, how can I actually be consciously, deliberately self-regulating my mind all the time? And that begs the question of, how often can you do it? So neuroscience shows us we can do this every 10 seconds. Doesn't mean we watch our clock every 10 seconds. It means that we can be very deliberate and conscious of, how am I thinking? How am I feeling? How am I choosing? How am I expressing myself? What's my body language? What was my reaction? What was the impact of my reaction? We can do that in the moment. And in doing that, we can also see our patterns. What are the patterns in our life? What are the addictions? What are the cycles? What are the things that are holding me back? And you then would take the neurocycle into a deeper level where you would do it daily for 15 to 45 minutes over the 63-day cycle. So that's kind of the two applications, the moment by moment, and then the big stuff, the traumas and so on, and the toxic habits, the established stuff that you would do in cycles of 63 days, which is also part of the research that I just recently did, because we all think that it takes 21 days to build a habit. It doesn't. It takes 21 days for reconceptualization to happen, which means you can convert a toxic thought to a healthy thought, but it takes another 42 days to stabilize that. So behavior change won't happen unless you work in these cycles. So the 5 steps is basically used on those 2 different levels. So the first step, very quickly, because I know that we're running out of time with the first segment, is to gather awareness. So it's to start the process of getting very self-regulated. So, and I chose the word specifically gather, because gather implies you have agency and control. So if you think of a huge big apple tree that's full of poison apples, and it's this big ugly apple tree, and here you are, the pilot and the co-pilot, and you're flying over this massive forest, which are all your thoughts, because thoughts look like trees. So that's the scenario, this huge big forest, and you're flying over it. Most of it's green. Through the middle, there's this dark strip of dark green trees that are perfect. And that's your wisdom mind, which is really what the co-pilot has access to. And then you're the messy mind, and you're flying over this forest, and you've got this tree, the smoke signal from this big lot of dark trees, and those trees thoughts look like trees. That's why I use that analogy. And you make the decision to gather awareness of that signal. What is that signal? The depression, the anxiety, those addiction patterns, whatever it is, those maybe just getting upset all the time or getting irritated, whatever it is, that's the most dominant thing blocking you at that moment.
Your mind. We have to go off to the next segment. But if I understand right, it's actually getting a bit of psychological distance from the noise, the chatter in your head, and just become aware and separate yourself from it.
Absolutely. It's gathering in exactly that, but it's gathering that's kind of the preparation phase for the whole 5-step process, where you create that distance, and these different techniques that talk about doing that. But then the gather awareness is where you actually land the plane. You pay attention to the signal, the depression, anxiety, you land your little helicopter, and you get out and you stand back. And you don't stand under the apple tree, so that we often get into life and we just get overwhelmed. We just throw ourselves in and we just get overwhelmed and don't know what to do. So the first step is stand back, create the distance, create the space. It's called the multiple perspective advantage. And you pick apples off a tree. You control it. You have agency. You can reach out and pick the apples off the tree. So you would look at different signals. So you'd look at your emotional signals like depression, anxiety, frustration. You'd look at your physical signals like your body. What's your body doing? GI symptoms or whatever they may be. Your behaviors. What are you doing? How are you showing up in the world? And then your perspective. So you gather those, but you have agency. You've taken control. And that's very important with the gather awareness portion of the first step, which is a very quick overview.
When we come back, we'll summarize that a little bit, and we'll talk about step 2. So
perfect.
The issue of psychological distancing is critical.
Yeah.
So you don't believe every stupid thing you think.
Exactly.
Stay with us.
As you say, the dragons.
Stay with us.
Welcome back. We are still here with our friend, Dr. Carolyn Leaf. She's written an amazing book, Cleaning Up Your Mental Mess. It's 5 simple, scientifically proven steps to reduce anxiety, stress, and toxic thinking. And in the last segment, we talked about gaining distance and also being able to sort of step back and look at the problem and having agency, being able to choose, correct? So we want to jump into step 2. What is step 2 of cleaning up your mental mess?
So once you've gathered awareness, as we mentioned, you've gathered them, you've taken control. So that's why it's gather, not just let it fall on your head. And you're very specific. Like let's say it's day 1 and you are because you always work in cycles of 63 days. You may only have the energy or the mental space to focus on one or two of the signals. So you don't have to rush the process. And that's really important. With gathering, you keep control all the time. And we see from neuroscience that the minute that you're aware, which is why this gather awareness is so important as we move into step 2, is that when you're aware of something, the toxic thought literally, and I always use these little trees, the toxic thought literally moves into the conscious mind and it becomes more malleable. And that means it's more changeable. So by gathering awareness, we now are swapping from being controlled, where it's suppressed, to controlling. And that in itself is quite painful. And that's why I always say with these 5 steps, when you're working with them with the big stuff, the toxic thoughts and the traumas and those kind of things, you're not going to do it for long. You just do 15 to 45 minutes a day. So you gather awareness. If you're doing 15 minutes, you'd spend just 3 or 4 minutes on that. And then you would go to your reflect. So step 2 is the reflect. And reflect, and by the way, I always use the trees as thoughts, because thoughts look like trees in the brain, and like trees have got branches and roots. So do thoughts. So the branches, the roots would be the source. So the origin, that would be the trauma experience, all the roots of it. And then that would manifest in your interpretation of the trauma. So this is how you think and feel about yourself. So maybe sexual trauma, like in your case, and maybe there's the whole perspective of I'm not good enough and shame and all that kind of thing. And that's how you show up in the world in terms of behavior. So when we do the 5 steps, being a thought detective, you literally are looking at the signals in the plane, landing the plane, and gathering awareness and tracking back to find out, why am I doing it? Because the overarching thing is we don't just show up for no reason. However we show up has a reason. And those reasons are what we need to find out and embrace, process, and reconceptualize. So we're not just going to chop the head off the weed in the garden because it'll just grow back. We have to do the work. And that's hard. And we all talk about that. The 3 of us talk about that all the time. There is no quick fix. We live in a world that wants to give us quick fixes. So we've been kind of trained in the last 40 years for quick fixes, but it's not.
But I like that. I want to make sure we say that again, because it sounds simple, but it's really important. However you show up has a reason. We've got to get to that root cause.
Yes.
So it's really important to look at the root cause. And sometimes people really avoid. That's the thing we try to avoid the most, is what is that root cause, because it's painful. But however you show up has a reason. And that's important. I just wanted to sort of like highlight.
I talk to my patients a lot about going into the pain.
Yes,
rather
me too.
than away from the pain. So
that's so good.
Awareness.
Gather awareness,
It's
reflect.
Awareness. To
it's reflect
on it.
So
how do people do that practically?
So on a reflect, basically that's where you ask, answer, and discuss. So if you think of a light shining through a prism, it goes in one color, it comes out the colors of the rainbow. So there's a depth to reflection. That's why I chose the word reflect. It's got an enormous depth to it. So where you ask, answer, discuss, and you're exploring, and you really are finding out, why do I have those feelings, those warning signals of depression? And I say specifically, you're reflecting on what you've gathered, what's in your basket. You're reflecting on the emotional warning signals, the physical warning signals, the behavioral warning signals, the perspective warning signals, because all of those are telling you, they're warning signals, they're messengers, they're telling you something. To go to your point that you made a moment ago, they're telling you something about this. And your whole objective in terms of the analogy with the 5 steps is to actually get to the point where you actually dig up the sand around the roots, uproot this tree, and reconceptualize it into a new healthy thought. And that new healthy thought, as you're going through the gather, reflect, and the 5 steps, is if you look deeply inside the tree, you'll see there's dark leaves and there's light leaves. And I did this on purpose, because reconceptualization doesn't mean that once you find the root cause that you eliminate your story goes. That it's there, like you tell your story in your book, and we all have our stories. Basically, your story is just reconceptualized. So now the green part is how you've chosen to live your future, not chained to the past, and that the light leaves are the story, but it's changed. And that's what you're getting to. That's where healing will come. Healing will never come if you just chop the head off and it'll grow back like the roots in the garden. So reflect is then the process of, why am I feeling that emotional warning signal of anxiety and depression? And then you answer yourself, and I'm feeling it, I think, because of, and then you have whatever your answer, why, and then answer again. So you're going through this process of very deliberate and intentionally digging deeper. With each of these stages, what I showed with my research is that you're creating more coherence in the brain. I mean, I'm speaking to the brain doctor, so you know exactly what that means. But the vital importance of, I look at more at the alpha, beta, delta, gamma, theta, those waves. And what we saw was that as people start going deeper with the reflect, where you start asking, answering, and discussing, we created starting to create a beautiful flow between the two sides of the brain, and you're starting to create introspection. So alpha will increase across the front part of the brain, which helps you to dig deeper. And then as you're reflecting, that information that you're gathering, it's very systematic. This process is very systematic. You don't blend it all together. You don't grab one signal and then unpack it. You grab the signal and then you step to the next step very systematically. So reflect is very much ask, answer, discuss. Ask, answer, discuss. That discuss portion is extremely important, because you want to start taking yourself and introspecting and going as deep as you can to find out why. Now, this is really hard work, and what I showed in my research is the treatment effect, that when things will get worse before they get better, which is what we said. And what was interesting is that I put 2 case studies in the book with the little brain images and things with the in color. I don't know if you guys have got the hard copy, but we put the QEEG in color. But this particular subject was interesting because this subject was like offline depression. Basically, the subject said, I am depression. They tried everything clinical. They had the label, they had done the medication, the treatments, and they were about to give up on life. They had this work, family, sleep, everything was just gone. And by the time they reached 21 days of doing these 5 steps, their brain had gone to a gray level, which is what you want. Obviously, gray is different for everyone, but it's basically showing that there's a balance in the brain. But what that said in terms of their narrative is they'd gone from being, I am depression, I am hopeless, to I now know why I have depression. And that's the point I want to make. So by day 21, they were seeing part of the roots. Their comment was, I've seen part, but I know there's more work to do. But by day 63 of continuing the 5 steps daily, which included the gather and the reflect, and we're going to do the other steps as well, is that they were saying, okay, it's now showing up in my behavior. So not only I'm not scared of depression, I know what depression, it's telling me something, it's a helpful messenger, and I now know how to manage it. So, and I also just want to say up front, this is not replacing therapy. I'm totally for people going for therapy. Therapy is vital. Coaching, therapy, counseling. But no one can fix you, and no therapist can fix a person. We can only facilitate the process. I know that, having practiced for so long, and you know that yourself, Daniel. So this doesn't replace. All I'm doing, you can do any technique, any therapy, EMDR, anything. It's simply, how do you live with yourself between therapy? If you therapy 2 days a week or whatever, you've got to live with yourself 24/7. What do you do with your mind?
It's work.
Yeah, you need tools in your tool chest.
Yeah, absolutely.
Preview for us, and then we have to go up to the next one. Steps 3, 4, and 5.
So then once you've reflected and gathered, you've done a lot of thought work. Now you need to capture that and write that down. And you only write at this point because you want the systematic process of the brain going deeper and deeper, and you going deeper and deeper. So the writing at this point is a very brain on paper, messy process.
So we'll talk about that more in the next
one.
Okay.
Okay.
4 and 5 is?
So 4 and 5 are write steps. So the third step is to write, but you write in the form of a Metacog. And then the 4th step is recheck, which is also writing. And then the 5th step is an action step. It's called an active reach. So that just kind of seals like a full stop at the end of the sentence. So those are basically the 3 steps that you use systematically in a time frame. And you can use them in 5 seconds to catch yourself in the moment. But when you're doing the hard work of detoxing established traumas, that you do daily, 15 to 45 minutes over the 63 days.
So when we come back, we're going to talk about writing and rechecking and active reach. Stay with us. Back. We are here with our friend Karen Leaf, the author of Cleaning Up Your Mental Mess, 5 simple, scientifically proven steps to reduce anxiety, stress, and toxic thinking.
And I assume you can buy this anywhere great books are sold?
Yes, anywhere books are sold. Amazon sold out 3 times, but they've restocked. That's another story.
On the success of the book.
Thank you.
It is just needed now
more
than ever before. And the whole idea I just love is that you can change your brain.
Mm-hmm.
Now, been sort of a theme of my life.
Exactly.
Now you can do it with your diet, no question. You can do it with
absolutely
exercise. But allowing an undisciplined mind makes your brain worse.
Mm-hmm. It makes it a mess.
Chronic stress damages your brain. You know, I was just thinking about a study they did at UCLA on people who had OCD. And OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, has its own signature in the brain, where the basal ganglia are really active and the anterior cingulate is really active. And one group they gave Prozac to and it calmed things down. The other group, they just taught them how to control their thoughts, and it also calmed the brain down. So doing the mental work to clean up your mental mess can help to optimize, as you show in the book, the physical functioning of your brain. So we've talked about gathering awareness. You are not your mind, getting some psychological distance. I have a fun technique. We actually learned it from our friend Stephen Hayes on one of these podcasts. Give your mind a name. Which is the same. It's that psychological distancing. Reflect. So think about it. That's what separates you from all the animals. Ask, answer, and discuss. And then in this podcast, I want to talk about the next 3 steps. So we have to be fairly brief. We want people to get the book. Get the book. It will help you. Doesn't mean you don't need therapy, but it'll make therapy go so much faster.
I did 2 years of therapy, intensive therapy, several times a week. And it's still having those tools in between that just help you really dig deep. You've got to be able, I mean, I think one of the benefits of really successful therapy and successful therapists is when they give you the tools to do it yourself in between, like you said.
Oh, absolutely. And
You've got to learn how to be introspective. Otherwise, you need therapy for the rest of your life.
Well, that's that's exactly, I agree with you. And what I showed, and to totally what you said there, what I showed with my most recent trials is that we had a control and experimental group, and the control group did not get the treatment. They did not get the 5 steps. The neurocycle and the experimental group did get the 5 steps, and they were doing it daily via an app, because we have an app as well. And the difference was unbelievable. Both became very aware of the issues, because we did all the blood biomarkers and the psychological testing and the narrative, which was the most important, and the DNA testing in the brain, the QEEG. But the treatment group got the 5 steps versus the others. And so the control group, what we saw is they got worse. And what was one of the strongest indicators of how they got worse was looking at their telomeres. So all of them at the beginning of the trial, they all came in really in a bad place. And we looked at their telomeres, and telomeres are, as you guys know, but for the audience that don't, it's the chromosomes that look like X's, and it's your fingernails. It's the end of the chromosomes. And just very, very briefly, just to show you how powerful managing your mind is through a system like the 5-step, the neurocycle, is that a lot of our subjects, their telomeres were so weakened and so short. Now that's not really good, because you make 1 million cells plus every second, and your telomeres are involved in that process. And telomeres, the recent research shows that they're a proxy for mind management. So the more your mind is a mess, the shorter the telomeres, the more your cells are affected, and the more your body becomes vulnerable and biologically not in the best place. You increase your vulnerability to disease by 35 to 98%. So we found some of our subjects in the trial, and I put a case study in, who was their biological age was almost 30 years older than their chronological age, and a sickly body. So here they're in their 30s, and they had a body of a sickly 65-year-old. Within 9 weeks that had reversed, and their chronological and biological ages matched. Their telomeres significantly lengthened. There was no drugs involved, no diet involved. It was pure mind management, because your mind's driving. I mean, that you speak about also, diet, exercise, we have to deal with all of those. But essentially what we saw was that those subjects that managed their mind, their biological and chronological age matched up, and then also all the biomarkers, the immune system, the inflammation, the brain markers, everything changed dramatically. But the ones that didn't, they got worse. It was so bad that they had so much high anxiety by the end of the study. Obviously, we gave them the mind management, and it changed things immediately. But the key thing here is that our mind's working anyway. You can go 3 weeks without food, 3 days without water, 3 minutes without oxygen, but you don't even go 3 seconds without using your mind. So we've got to get the help of therapy and all the professionals like yourselves, and get with the help that you offer at Amen Clinic and therapy. But we have to also live with ourselves between those sessions, and that's really what the 5 steps do. So the third step is then, as I mentioned, is the right. Third and fourth step are both right steps, and the first right step is get your mind and brain on paper. Don't worry about like a literary piece, just pour it out. The biggest thing is to drag as much out as you can. So I developed a system called the Metacog, which is 38 years in research. And it really is a very strong way of writing. It's pattern writing that basically matches what these trees look like. So like a tree has a trunk and branches grow, and all branches grow out of the previous branches. You basically create these patterns on the page, and you just put down your thoughts. You just put down these words, and whatever comes up, it's basically your memories in your thoughts. And it's a total mess, but almost like you're vomiting it on paper. But that really pulls the two sides of the brain together and really activates the hippocampus and all the different prefrontal cortex. It creates such a dynamic flow in the brain, because the mind is driving the brain. And the mind, as you bring this order in the mind, you're bringing this order in the brain. And then the fourth step is the recheck, where you can now go back and see, wow, what did I just write? This is unbelievable. I experienced this and this and this, and I didn't even know I knew that. It's a very revealing process. I use it all the time in therapy with my patients. So I've made a simple version in the book. And then the fifth step is, so the fourth step, just to finish that step, you're going back into the messy Metacog, pouring your brain on paper, the mess on the page, literally, and you start finding your patterns, your activators, the cycles that are happening, and you start looking for the antidotes, the reconceptualization, the other perspective. How can I see this differently? What does this mean? And it's honestly, this doesn't happen in one sitting. I have to stress this. To sort out, as we all know, toxic thinking.
You have to do it regularly for it
exactly.
to become a muscle.
Exactly. I mean, on day one, you may just identify that you're depressed, and that, okay, depression, and I'm withdrawing, and there's something going on, something in the past, and my recheck is just I'm going to have to do some more work. I mean, it's tiny little bits every day, and there's certain key days where we saw major neuroplastic changes, like at day 7, day 14, day 21 was extremely interesting, because that's where we saw gamma peaks, where people actually were starting to say, instead of I am depression, I know why I'm depressed, and they were starting to say I know what to do. And then, as I said, the changes happen over time to 63 days, where the behaviors start changing. So the fifth step then is to kind of round off the day's work. And that is, okay, so this is what I've learned. I've learned that I'm feeling depressed. I'm withdrawing my behaviors. My perspective is life sucks. And my body has got tremendous heart palpitations, and there's just a lot of physical stuff going on. I'm not sure why, but I can start seeing that there's a reason behind this, and there's definitely something from my past, because this is a pattern. It's happening differently in these certain situations. So therefore, my active reach could be something like, it's okay to feel depressed. There's a message in the depression. And you literally write that statement down, and you put it somewhere, or put it in your phone, or I have an app called the Neuro Cycle App, and it's got a little section, active reach reminders, where you can type it in, and then that pops up during the day. And during the day, you know how we have the tendency to ruminate, especially when we've activated something from the past, and you've got the scary thing, that these flashbacks that are frightening and overwhelming. We have to limit the time we focus on those. So the active reach keeps you in a safe space, so that you can go about your day, and every time you're tempted to fall back and go and rethink through, you say, no, I'll do that tomorrow. I'm just going to focus on my active reach. And so, I mean, that's just a very simple summary. There's a lot more detail in the book, and there's many ways you can do there's lots of detail with each of the steps, but that's the basic overarching principle. And then you'd repeat it the next day, and you'd repeat it the next day, and so on until you get to day 21. From day 22 to 63, you do just step number 5, because by it takes more or less 21 days to be, as a thought detective, to embrace, process, and reconceptualize this into this, using the 5 steps daily. And then this is now the new pattern we want to grow. But like any new little plant that you've grown, it's just a new little thought. It doesn't have enough energy to impact your consciousness. So you're not going to have a behavior change yet. But you've got to deliberately practice this new way of thinking, at least for a minute to 2 minutes every day for 42 days.
I love that you did not make this, 3 minutes to everlasting change.
Oh gosh, no. No, it's a lifestyle.
That if you want control of your life, if you want to manage it, you have to change your habits, and it's a daily practice.
Absolutely.
So like eating right,
like exercise, whatever it is.
Oh, all of it, yeah. And that's all mind driven.
Than learning to manage your mind, and you have to do it every day. It's got to become your new.
Your mind's always with you. So if you don't manage it, then it's a mess. And so we're all a mess.
When we come back, we're gonna talk about some stories from Carolyn's book and how you can go further to clean up your mental mess. Stay with us.
Your brain is always listening. I am thrilled to be your guide and show you how to tame your dragons so that you can have the happiness, peace, and the relationships you deserve.
Welcome back. We are still here with our friend, Dr. Carolyn Leaf. Just so smart, so amazing. And her new book, Cleaning Up Your Mental Mess. Such a great message. And we're talking about the 5 steps, 5 simple, scientifically proven steps to reduce anxiety, stress, and toxic thinking. You can buy Cleaning Up Your Mental Mess wherever great books are sold. And we sort of went through the steps in the last 3 segments. And now we want to hear from Dr. Leaf about some of her favorite stories and how these steps have actually worked practically. And I love in the last segments, we talked about, this is not one of those, overnight, like 3 minutes to everlasting change, because that's just nonsense. She's going to teach you how to make this a lifelong practice for you to be in control of your mind. So what are some of the stories of people doing this? Like, what are your favorite success stories?
Wow. I have, you say that, I'm thinking, how can I pick one? There's like thousands that have been coming through. So I put 2 stories in the book. But there's one that just happened recently of someone who actually got hold of the book and who's actually known of my work for a few years. And I actually interviewed them recently, and their story is phenomenal, where they went through, as a young child, went through multiple, from the age of 5 through 18, they were experienced sexual abuse, but like really bad, and in the church, and they had a lot of religious trauma. And when they went to this particular person went to like their pastors, there was this whole thing, well, it's your fault, you don't have enough faith. And it was terrible. It was so this person was so traumatized for so many years, and always, I went to therapy, but it was always like talking in circles. And then one day a friend actually gave him one of my books, and he started following me, and then got this most recent book, and we made contact, and that's why I actually ended up doing an interview. But he just said that he suddenly realized, when he realized that he had agency, had the autonomy to make the past. He can't change the past, but he could go back. And as he explains it, he could go back as an adult and look at those symptoms, all the warning signals, the way I described, and he could go back and see, okay, well, that's me at 5. That's that trauma at 5. And say that I'm now the adult of whatever, 30, 35 or whatever, in his 30s. And I can go to the 5-year-old version of me, and I can actually say, okay, this is terrible what happened, but now you're safe. And in doing that, he said he used the 5 steps to get to that process and then reconceptualize it. So now here's the healed 5-year-old. And so there's the dark green leaves being the healed 5-year-old, and then that's the 5-year-old, the story. So the past doesn't go away, but he's changed how the past played out into the present. And he said he didn't know he could do that. He didn't know he had autonomy. And I talk about the pathway to empowerment in my research, where when we realize that we have agency over our mind, that our mind is how we think, feel, and choose, and that we have this messy mind and wise mind, and that so with our mind, with our wise mind, we can actually manage the messy mind, because the messy mind's part of life. It's part of who we are. It's never going away. So if we deny that or suppress that, then that's not going to help you. But if you accept, okay, I've made a mistake, I snapped, I got guilty, I got irritated, I own it, but now I'm going to, why did I do that? And you do that thought detective work. That's where you're getting that mind management. And this is what this particular person was saying, that they realized that, hey, I can actually stand back and I can see that the pain of how I'm showing up now has got all these roots, and here's a system for going through that. And they were still going to therapy, but he was using that in therapy. And so that was just a great story of how this person now has a platform reaching out to those people that have been very traumatized from sexual abuse, and basically sort of uses the 5 steps to help his subjects, his patients. So that was really great.
I do too.
In the sense that when you wrote The Relentless Courage,
yes, I'm like, my brain is like,
child, is you go, I mean, you really have never seen yourself as a victim, but you really go from a victim to not only a survivor, but a thriver.
Yeah, I call myself a surthriver. That's what I mean.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Yeah.
I love that. Because you talk.
Schizophrenics make up new words.
I love that. I love. The other day I was in.
Surthriver.
Yeah,
you're a surthriver.
I love that. That's wonderful.
But I like this. Because that's how I felt when I wrote my story. I saw the past. Well, even when I went through therapy, because I did that a while back, when I went through the healing process, I saw the past one way. When I was done, it was an ongoing process. But when I went through that process of healing, intentionally healing the past, just like you're saying, by the time I was done, I couldn't change the past incident that happened.
No,
but I did change the way I saw, thought, and
exactly your perspective. Yeah,
and that's important.
It's so important.
See myself now.
Exactly.
Feel about your future.
Yeah, I feel like a badass now. So
well, you are a badass.
Right.
I'm afraid of you.
I love that. No, it is because you basically.
We only have a few minutes left. Let's talk about how people, so they can get the book, but you have other resources for them as well.
Yes, what I have the app. It's called the Neuro Cycle App. It used to be called the Switch app, and it swaps over. It actually swapped over this week. So into the Neuro Cycle App, it's all updated. It matches the book. It's literally like me giving you therapy, and all the basic 21-day, 63-day cycles in there. And then I have a whole lot of guides. In the second part of this book, where I explain how to do the neurocycle, there's lots of, as you would have seen, lots of examples of how to apply it in the 5 steps for toxic trauma, the different types, big T, small t, acute traumas and toxic habits. And so there's lots of examples, and I've also put little hacks. So for example, let's say that you're just about to go into a meeting and someone says something to you and it throws you completely, and you've got to kind of get yourself back together so that you can be focused in the meeting. You can also use the 5 steps for that. So that in the app, there's also that guide. In chapter 14 of this book, I actually show you how to use the whole process of mind management as a lifestyle. So I talk about how you can just build it into your lifestyle, and how I do it all the time. You can prepare for sleep in the morning using a neurocycle so that you can sleep well at night, all that kind of stuff. So the app's great. Then I have obviously, like all of our social media pages, Dr. Caroline Leaf. I have lots of other books as well. And we have a neurocycle lab starting and all kinds of stuff. So there's lots of stuff. I have a podcast, Cleaning Up Your Mental Mess, which you guys have both been on, phenomenal programs. Your interviews, and there's a lot of help out there.
So I think all of it is worth that one thing. If you can't change a past event that happened to you, but you can have a tool that helps you change the way you think, see, and feel about what happened to you in the past.
Yeah,
it will change your life going forward.
I agree with you. Like, you can change how the past plays out into your future, and that's the power.
Your past does
Your
not have
past
to
does not define you, but
infect
you have to get control of it.
your
Absolutely. Totally. And you can, because your mind's malleable and you can train your mind. You are your mind. Your mind is your aliveness. If you're dead, there is no mind. The difference
But you
between a
have to
dead
take
person and alive is your mind. Yeah. But you have to take responsibility for your mind. So mind management's managing your aliveness. So it manages everything else.
You can do it. Thank you, my friend.
So
Oh,
good.
thank you. Thank you both. Love talking to you both.
Safety and health and
I got lots of
electricity.
notes.
Thank you so much. So lovely seeing you both, and hope we see you in person soon.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.
If you're enjoying the Brain Warriors Way podcast, please don't forget to subscribe so you'll always know when there's a new episode. And while you're at it, feel free to give us a review or 5-star rating, as that helps others find the podcast.
If you're interested in coming to Amen Clinics, use the code PODCAST10 to get a 10% discount on a full evaluation at amenclinics.com. For more information, give us a call at 855-978-1363.